introduce the man who will introduce as well as our moderator, both of whom are board members of the Olmsted Network. We are lucky on our national board to have two members from Wisconsin. Philip Schultz, whom you heard from earlier today from Fox Point, and Wayman Winston from Cudahy. And so Wayman, who will be introducing our panelists, is a chairman of the 30th Street Industrial Corridor and former executive director of the Wisconsin Housing and Economic Development Authority. He was raised on the south side of Chicago, so he's been immersed in Olmsted landscapes for some time and received his Bachelor of Architecture from the University of Illinois at Chicago. Before coming here, he worked at South Shore Bank, the first community development bank in the U.S., and later as deputy director and COO of the Portland Development Commission and deputy director of the Atlanta Development Authority Tax Increment Division. Again, it's clear he likes cities with Olmsted connections. And our moderator will be Bronwyn Nichols Lodato. We heard a little bit from her earlier. She is chairman of Friends of the Park, which is an omnibus friends group for parks in Chicago. She is president of the Midway Plaisance Park Advisory Council, and I might add that is an elected position. And I want to also say that she has just received a new and wonderful appointment as Assistant Professor Education and African American Studies at Washington University in St. Louis. So with that, let me turn it over to Wayman. Thank you.
Thank you, Dee Dee. Good afternoon, everyone. As that last question that was posed about Jackson Park, parks are important. They're important in our cities, our towns, and this panel, the future of our parks, those parks here in Milwaukee, is a timely and important panel. And with us to advance our discussion is a group of leaders and administrators, both at the city and county level. Let me start first with Preston Cole, currently serving as director of the Milwaukee Department of Administration for the city of Milwaukee. Preston has previous work both in the city of Milwaukee as well as former Secretary, Department of Natural Resources, the state official concerned about this great heritage of the forests of Wisconsin. Also joining him is Mr. Tarantino, Deputy Parks Director for Milwaukee County Parks. And as we know, Milwaukee County has a phenomenal park system. And as Deputy Director, Jim has significant insight on our parks. Also joining our panel is Supervisor Peter Burgalis. Peter is active in many of these issues, including the naming of the thoroughfare through Washington Park as the Olmsted Way. And of course, you've been introduced, thank you. You've been introduced to our moderator, Bronwyn, and I will turn it over to her. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Bronwyn Nichols Lodato. It's wonderful to see you all. I just rode a train to get here from Chicago. So hello from the South Side, sending you greetings. Just by way of introduction, I am on the board of the Olmsted Network, and I also am, my Olmsted heritage is that I am president of the Midway Plaisance Advisory Council. as Dee Dee had shared earlier, and I'm happy to talk to you all about that afterwards. But I just am also really pleased to be here as a park enthusiast, where I also serve as chairman of the board of Friends of the Parks, which is a citywide parks advocacy organization in the city of Chicago. Please look us up. We are known for taking up the fights and the battles to protect public spaces for all. Very much consistent with the principles of the Olmsted Network's advocacy to protect the historic, beautiful landscapes for all. So I'm very pleased to be here today also to serve as moderator. That's the hat I'm wearing right now for today's discussion. And hello to everyone. Nice to meet you all. Sorry I had to run in here from a call I had to take earlier. And I guess I just wanted to start off maybe by having each of you just give some general opening remarks about your work and your perspective on Olmsted Parks before we dive into any particular questions, if that would be okay. Who would like to start?
Hi, everyone. Peter Bergelis, Milwaukee County District 15 Supervisor. And I live on the south side of Milwaukee, but the 15th District stretches from Washington Park on the north side south past Alverno. That means nothing to you guys, but it's a very wide and diverse centerpiece of Milwaukee County. I am honored that Washington Park is part of my district because there's so much opportunity there, so much history. But I also represent parts of Jackson Park that we talked about earlier today. Renaming Olmsted Way was a initiative that the previous supervisor had started, and it kind of stalled. But after I took office in 2022, Mike Howden, in the last row there, Mike, raise your hand, was very quick to bring that topic to my attention, and we relaunched that initiative, got it through committee, got it through the board, and had the renaming, ribbon cutting, or reveal, I guess. We didn't have a ribbon. The reveal on October, I think it was 31st last year. The reason I think Olmsted Way, renaming that roadway as Olmsted Way is important, it not only is a place where you can drive and bike and walk and enjoy shared green spaces in Milwaukee County, but it's also a tribute to the legacy that Milwaukee County Parks embraces the Olmsted Way, that shared green spaces should be available and accessible to residents at no cost. So that roadway, when you see it, when you drive through later on today, that street sign has two meanings, and I'm very proud that we were able to get that through. We also were able to connect Highland Boulevard, which has bike lanes, to Washington Boulevard, which has bike lanes at either end of Olmsted Way, and make a road diet or reduce from 2 lanes of traffic to 1 lane of traffic in each direction, add some bike lanes with road striping on Olmsted Way so that it makes more sense and it's a safer roadway and hopefully a little bit of a slower commute for people passing through the park and enjoying the landscape before and after they head to the office. But I'm honored to be here. Thank you so much. And I'm grateful that the Olmsted Network came to Washington Park to have your meeting, but also for your collaboration and influence throughout the last couple of years with the Olmsted Way renaming project and other initiatives at Washington Park. So thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everybody. Jim Tarantino with Milwaukee County Parks Department. A belated welcome to Washington Park and the Washington Park Senior Center. We are very thankful that you've held your event here this year. So welcome to Milwaukee if you're from out of town, and thank you for joining us if you're from in town. And I guess to answer your question, I would use the word stewardship. That is the mission of the Milwaukee County Parks Department, is to steward a thriving park system that positively impacts every visitor. And that word stewardship is really key and important because we've inherited, in 2023, we've inherited a park system that's many generations old, that was built by luminaries like Olmsted, but also people like Charles Whitnell, that had very intentional thoughts in mind when the park system was developed. And the park system, while there are changes, there's always changes to what happens in parks, what gets built in parks, when things get rebuilt or maintained, how does that happen? But fundamentally, the park system of today is the same as the one that was passed down to us. And stewardship is so important to make sure that we can pass it along to future generations, and really embedding that thinking in all of the decisions that we have to make on a daily basis with such a vast system. If you're unfamiliar, the Milwaukee County Park System was founded in 1907. There's 153 parks, 15,500 acres of land. About 10,000 of that is natural areas, but a good number of them are urban parks that have a mixture of uses, all the way from a small triangle formed by an intersection to urban parks like Washington that you're in now, to suburban parks like Whitnall or Dretska or Grant Park. We have dozens of miles of Lake Michigan shoreline. We have dozens of miles of off-street bike trails, 13 golf courses, a marina, and it's really like operating its own municipality. We have so many different things that go into it. So to center our decision-making on a daily basis, we really embrace stewardship and really thinking about what are we doing today? How does this impact the success of the park system? Because we are so resource constrained. We don't have money in a lot of cases to do new things, so we have to be smart and make sound decisions. And to answer the question about Olmsted, how do we feel about it? It's incredibly fortunate. We are lucky to have, pardon me, the Olmsted parks that we do within Milwaukee County. So Lake Park is Milwaukee County Park. Riverside is split. Some of it's City of Milwaukee Park, some of it's Milwaukee County. Newberry Boulevard's a city street in Washington Park. And we're fortunate, we go to conferences, we interact with park systems from throughout the state and throughout the country, and not every area can say that they have an Olmsted Park, and we have multiple. So it really do feel lucky for that.
Fly me to the moon. Is this on? I have to turn it on. Awesome. Hello, folks. My name's Preston. I'm here representing Mayor Cavalier-Johnson. These are important meetings for the Johnson administration. And so I'm here as an emissary of goodwill and to remind us that Olmsted got it right. And as a trained forester, I also was park superintendent for the city of St. Louis, moved here and became city forester for Milwaukee. And through a host of other activities, I just finished my stint with Governor Evers as 4 years as secretary of your Department of Natural Resources. And I just want to remind you of a few things. We have something very, very special here in Wisconsin, in part by how design happens, but the nature-based economy that we have. 84,000 miles of shoreline in the state of Wisconsin, 15 state forests, 44 state trails. We're third in the nation of out-of-state fishing license, whether you're fishing here, one of our ponds in Washington Park, or on one of our lake systems, or certainly the Great Lake. $18 billion of outdoor recreation. People make their way to Wisconsin for a lot of value of being in the outdoors, riding bikes in the outdoors, settling themselves down, and what we have here is our very own emerald necklace that Mr. Tarantino and the Parks Department has before them. It doesn't come without thought. These are generational issues that some of our founding fathers, and certainly when we talk about design and what Olmsted was really getting at, is that being in the outdoors does settle us down. It cools us down. It reminds us there's something bigger than us. And because of that, Wisconsin and certainly Milwaukee County has something very special right here. And in doing so, we are at the epicenter of where people are going to make their way to Wisconsin and to Milwaukee. You have no idea how much it costs to get a gallon of water in Arizona. And people are going to make their way here because of the water and because of our outdoor economics that we have. But you also have to know that, we have to value and take care of what we do. We need funding for these programs. We need opportunities for others that are underserved in communities of color, where tree canopy is low. So we flew Milwaukee back in the late 90s with American Forest. Our tree canopy then was about 18%. The national goal by American Forest it should be 40%. And where the canopy is important. And where it's not is important. Where there is large amounts of canopy, those home values at the time were about $250,000. But where it's not are in communities of color. So as city forester, we really took that on, and we wanted to make sure that we create a diverse urban forest tree canopy as well as design of our parks and engagement in our systems. So during Dutch elm disease, which nobody here can remember, but it devastated the upper Midwest, and consequently here in Milwaukee, on the east side where it was first detected, just horrible outcomes. But where the city stood, though, is that we are not going to let this stand. So they planted trees between the sidewalk and the curb, and you can only imagine what that does to your housing value when you have tree-lined streets that people can walk up and down. More importantly, we figured out where we did not plant trees. After those trees came out on private property, because the law said if you have an elm tree and it's dying, you're responsible for taking it. So we caused for the removal of almost 100,000 trees on private property with no way to put them back. So we have canopy loss in areas where people can't afford to plant those trees. And so organizations like Greenie Milwaukee and others stood up to help stem that tide and get trees on private property. But being in the outdoors and understanding Olmsted's premise about, and when I said earlier, he got it right, he understood the connections between men and women and being in the outdoors. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Waylon. Those are my beginning words, and look forward to the conversation.
Thank you very much for your comments. And you all are touching on critical themes related to governance, funding. We know from the previous discussion or presentation from Patricia O'Donnell that there's a patchwork sometimes that goes into making all of this work. So I'm going to just dive right in with this first question. Also, sensitivity to the fact that this is an urban setting that we're talking about. Olmsted believes strongly in the public obligation to provide parks for all people, right? Many of Milwaukee County Parks' values, priorities, and operations can only be preserved and improved with government revenue. So we're going to go there. So with decision-making process, what decision-making process will ensure the best balance between preserving and improving those values, priorities, and operations that require government revenue vis-a-vis those activities that can properly be paid with private revenue, right? We're just hearing about the public-private here. So how would you all talk about those decision-making processes and revenue?
Engagement. Washington Park is in a very diverse part of Milwaukee. There are all sorts of people who live surrounding Washington Park, and it's important that every voice is heard. About public-private engagement, you might have noticed the Urban Ecology Center, which is operating in a leased former Parks building. They just announced, and we broke ground a couple weeks ago, for a $17 million, they call it a renovation, I think it's a new build, but a $17 million investment in Washington Park. They provide programming to kids and school kids throughout Milwaukee. They have three locations, and this one will be able to more than double its impact and the numbers of kids coming through their door each year when they renovate. The lease generates some revenue for the park system, maybe $1 a year, but the impact is more important. In terms of government funding, Milwaukee County has been underfunded, and our shared revenue from the state has been stagnant for the last 20 plus years. We have been cutting and cutting and cutting. We've had to cut $300 million of spending in the last 10 years, about $30 million a year. It's taken its toll on the park system. The county acts as an arm of the state, and we have to do whatever the state tells us to do. Courts, jail, sheriff, health and human services, those are responsibilities and obligations that the county must provide. Transit and parks, unfortunately, are not mandated services. So they're at the bottom of the list of priorities, but they're at the top of the list when we have to cut something. to their credit and to Jim's credit, Milwaukee County Parks is 56% self-funded. 56% of their revenue comes from golf courses and beer gardens. And it's a blessing that Milwaukeeans enjoy beer gardens. But that's what saved our Parks Department from even more devastating cuts. What does a public-private partnership look like? You'll hear later, I think, from Kevin about Friends of Washington Park. I think one of Olmsted's lasting tenets is that parks need to be adaptable and will certainly change with changing needs of the community. And you've seen that, we've seen that directly in Washington Park, where we used to have our county zoo here in Washington Park, right outside the door of this building. And as neighborhood and community needs change, Washington Park has followed suit, still mindful of the legacy and the other tenets of Olmsted. But funding is difficult. But everyone, and I think one thing that the pandemic showed us is that everyone appreciates our shared green spaces even more, because you got a chance to go out and exercise and enjoy some fresh air. But funding's difficult.
And here's the answer. So our Parks Department is unique. Our annual budget right now is about $43 million a year, of which roughly $24 million is generated by revenue that we make ourselves, not tax levy. The bulk of it coming from golf courses and McKinley Marina, but also food and beverage sales. And this has been a dynamic that's, over the last 30 years, we've been pushed in this direction to generate more revenue, to maintain what we have, just to keep the baseline for park services. The ratio of public support to revenue generated in form of tax levy support for the Parks Department has completely shifted. 30 years ago, we were 75% funded by tax levy, and Milwaukee County support for the park system was 25% of the total tax levy throughout the whole county. And many things have changed in 30 years, but one thing that hasn't is our overall budget. So we have the same budget that we did in 1989 when you're adjusting for inflation, which was 79 million inflation adjusted dollars in 89, and now it's the 43 that I mentioned, of which most of that is generated by our own staff, trying to strike the balance always of providing public parks and recreational services and generating revenue from doing that, not straying into profit motivated activities. Everything we do is oriented with a public good, and that really translates over to the partnerships that we've developed, like the one that Supervisor is mentioning with Urban Ecology Center. We've also developed a youth community center in Tiefenthaler Park with the Peak Initiative. That these are projects that are entirely funded by private donations, but we make sure that they have a public benefit and try to strike that balance, that when we partner with groups, that they're providing the same access, that they have the same public mission in mind. And that's a really tricky thing to do. So you have to pick the right partners and structure it the right way. And these are long-lasting agreements. So the financial realities we're struggling with today, we're making decisions that last for generations, for 25, 50 years into the future. So we really take a lot of effort to make sure that we're doing it right. Just on the positive side of things, collaboration with other governments has never been better. The collaboration with, and I'm not just saying this because I'm sitting next to Preston Cole, but the collaboration with the state, the collaboration with the state of Wisconsin has been great recently, and the collaboration with the city of Milwaukee has been great. And it means that we're all strapped, and we need to make strategic, coordinated investments in infrastructure. So an example of that, maybe not related to Olmsted, but just to make it real, out here on Valete Street, the city of Milwaukee recently restriped the road, repaved the road, added bike lanes. It helps to reduce reckless driving, slow speeds, make it a safer experience for pedestrians and cyclists, new crosswalks. Then you see where all that investment hits the border of the park, there's a lack of improvements. And so we're using some federal ARPA funding, American Rescue Plan funding, to redo the pathways, repave the pathways in Washington Park. It hasn't happened yet, but we're doing that, and we're focusing on Washington because we're trying to be coordinated with the city, so there's more bang for your buck. It's also the same is true on the east side of the park on 39th Street. We're more improvements are coming. So when we have the opportunity to collaborate, we always will. And I just have to, make a plug. It really is true that the collaboration has been fantastic with the city recently.
Thank you for that. That's awesome. These are competing interests. It's tough. It's extraordinarily tough when we try to balance the needs of public safety and road improvements, capital improvement programs, and libraries and parks. And it is really up to our elected officials, and we certainly have one here, is certainly all about our park system and the greening of Milwaukee County. But having come here from St. Louis, those types of competing interests are still here today. And the opportunities exist for us to reset how we look at our parks. And Milwaukee County and other county park systems across the state are doing this for flood mitigation, for example. How do you put a price on what Milwaukee County Parks is doing to alleviate flooding in neighborhoods and homes? The value-added proposition there is millions of dollars of structural improvement using what we already have. How does that show up in the budget? Well, quite frankly, it doesn't. User fees and being able to rethink how we fund these programs. These are not only outdoor recreation, but we have to tie them to wellness and the importance of having a well community with green spaces to go to. What value-added proposition do we receive by having individuals take long walks, get on bikes, stop and get a beer at the beer truck that you guys do? That's awesome. Anybody tell you how wonderful that is? You ought to stop and get a beer in a park, right? Great idea. But see, you see what people are left up to then to fund their parks. And there has to be a sea change in how we think about green spaces, parks, recreation. And we need organizations like the Olmsted, as well as park enthusiasts, park people and the like, who are advocates and show up at finance meetings and talk eloquently about the necessary need for the human existence, being in the outdoors, and providing a product that people stop and spend money when they pass through this city, this county, and leave tons of money behind. Let's begin to rethink what Olmsted said, which is this advent of, the early advent of wellness attached to being in the outdoors. The other advent of just being of sound mind and body by being in the outdoors, and you're not stuck in a tenement, and you get out and you rethink your life. And what value do we put on that? And that value needs to continue to resonate from park officials and what I would call, thoughtful, knowledgeable politicians to say, what does it look like if we didn't have green space in parks?
Thank you for that. That's really powerful. And what came to mind, just two things. The notion of parks as infrastructure. We're talking about the fact that, there are funds that have been used, but it's really critically important now to not think of parks as extras, but as critical components of our infrastructure, urban, rural, et cetera. So I want to also just invite folks to be sure, based on the recommendation, I think it's great, make sure you're paying attention to when your park department is holding its budget hearing, public budget hearing. Those are really critical, important opportunities. So I want to just ground us a little bit more in this last question in Olmsted and in Washington Park specifically. That's where we are today. And I'm going to blend the question here about bringing in, as we were just talking, the panel was just talking about Olmsted principles in park planning and thinking about that vis-a-vis Washington Park. And so the last master plan for Washington Park was issued in 2000, and it listed as key concerns image and safety, circulation and wayfinding. Many of these challenges still exist today, a little over almost a quarter century later. So what do you see based on what we've just discussed about funding and constraints and opportunities and partnerships? What do you see as positive paths forward for Washington Park?
I think it's important to note that more active parks are safer parks. Can't say safe parks, because there's always that element, but the more people that come and use and enjoy Washington Park, the safer and more activity that we have, the safer the park will be for everyone. Washington Park is in the center of Milwaukee, and it's not, neighborhoods around Washington Park have some challenges, but incidents in Washington Park are really limited. When we consider the benefit of Washington Park compared to other parks in our system, I'm biased because Milwaukee County has a vision statement that will be the healthiest county in the state of Wisconsin by achieving racial equity. And that means making targeted investments and making every decision at the county level through a racial equity lens. Washington Park needs to be one of those primary sources of that investment. Safer, more active parks are safer parks for everyone.
When I think of Washington Park, first of all, Washington Park is my park. I live in this neighborhood, and I know I know every single inch of it, every blade of grass of it, and I'm really excited by the projects that we have in the works now to improve it, be it the Urban Ecology Center, rebuilding the bridges in the lagoon, and all of the things we know we need to do. We need to redesign and redo Olmsted Way. We need to repair that road. We're also working with the County Department of Transportation and the state on the Reconnecting Communities project, which is looking at taking 175, the highway that forms the western border of the park, and removing it and reconnecting the Washington Heights neighborhood to the west side of West Park. And that's a really exciting project and could become a reality, of course, if all the funding aligns and it moves forward in our lifetime, in the near future. That will be huge to connect that neighborhood to this park and really bring people together. Because Washington Park is so unique in that it's so large in the west side of the city of Milwaukee with very different neighborhoods surrounding it. And we have events that, like Washington Park Wednesdays, that are put on by volunteers. Thank you to those volunteers who are here today. Melissa. We have a new friends group that's been forming. Thank you to everyone here that's been volunteering with that, and Kevin and others. And we need more of that activation coming from people, volunteers, by the way, who also pay taxes and have the same expectation that their taxes are funding the park system, give themselves more to solving those problems. And the activation makes a huge difference because those Washington Parks Wednesdays events, which are concerts at the Blatt's Temple of Music, the band shell here in the park, bring people of all backgrounds from all the neighborhoods, from the Washington Park neighborhood, Martin Drive, Sherman Park, Washington Heights, all together every Wednesday night during the summer. And it is amazing mixing that you only dream about in most cases. And that really shows the potential of Washington Park. And the name of that Reconnecting Communities Highway Removal Program is so apt because the park has that potential to reconnect all of these communities that have been segregated for so many generations.
It's time to go on offense. So at the DNR, we follow about 91 groups, outdoor Afro, Latino women hiking, and the like, 90. And what we do is just follow what they're doing and how they're doing it. Outdoor Afro in Chicago gets kids into the Chicago Park District. Of course, Latino women hiking do exactly what it says. They get into the outdoors and travel around the country and certainly locally doing what they want, doing what they need to do. And so we have to rethink a little bit about where our partnerships are in today's modern world. I don't need to tell you what Wisconsin and the U.S. will look like by 2070. Primarily people of color, a lot of urban households. We need to connect the dots with those individuals so that we can bring them to the table to help organizations like Olmsted, park enthusiasts, and park departments around this country says it's too valuable for us not to make these investments in our cities, towns, and villages. See, what we need to do is make sure when we show up at city government and listen to the vote, or show up in county government or state government and listen to the vote, we have to have the right people in the room that are the advocates for this in a thoughtful, mindful way. And when people show up at the Capitol or at City Hall or the courthouse, that'll resonate to elected officials on how important this is. But we got to begin to then connect the dots with other non-traditional programs, non-traditional organizations that can be our allies.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for these amazing comments. And so we'd like to shift to Q&A right now. See if there are any questions from the audience. We'll go here and then here.
The state of Wisconsin is sitting on an $8 billion surplus. That surplus developed 3 decades ago when the legislature and the governor changed revenue sharing for local governments that played a major role in the level of fiscal stress that both our city and counties face. If you were king for the day for the state of Wisconsin, you had access of that $8 billion for our parks, where would you put those resources?
I'd ask the neighbors where they want it. The reality is that Milwaukee County Parks has $500 million of deferred maintenance. So we have shuttered buildings that are standing, we can't afford to tear them down. All across our 153 parks, all across our 15,000 acres. It's disheartening, to say the least, that our uncle Robin in Madison has a $7 billion pocket wad of cash sitting in his pocket, and although relationships with the state are much better than they were, the relationship between Milwaukee County or Milwaukee and the legislature have not changed. They do not respect that surplus came from Milwaukee County. We're the economic engine for the state of Wisconsin. When Milwaukee County does well, southeastern Wisconsin does well, and Wisconsin follows suit. When we suffer, the same is true. We have a lot of opportunity for investment in Milwaukee County, a lot of need, and it's really tough to sit here as an elected official, not really a politician, but elected, I like to say elected official, that we have, that funding is so close and we need it so much, but the reality is we know we're never going to get it.
We need to end gerrymandering so that our democracy can actually work and we can make those decisions.
Are you running for office too? No? Okay. So, philosophically, this side of an aisle is conservative in terms of financing. This side of the aisle wants to make sure that the funding necessary to support services to citizens is in play. And it's been that way for 1,000 years. How do we connect the dots between the $8 billion that people are sitting on and giving it back in some dosage to individuals in cities, towns, and villages? We got a better response out of ARPA money than we got out of money that comes out of the state of Wisconsin that you folks have already invested in. So the goal is to connect the dots between the two sides of the aisle to figure out that sweet spot of this is mental health, this is economic development, this is natural systems, this is climate, this is equity, all of the requisite adjectives that we need to say in a room when they start moving around the state of Wisconsin. If you are a parks enthusiast and want to see your money come to the top for park-related programs, whether at the city, state, or county level, you have to follow that train. And certainly in Wisconsin, they're going to make their way around the state, as they do every year, come to cities, towns, and villages, and ask you and listen to you, how should we spend your money? You cannot be absent at those meetings. Letters. You know how many lobbyists walk around state government and city government trying to get programs through? Well, the Olmsted, you can't pay a lobbyist, but it's you folks. It's regular people showing up and knocking on the door of an elected official and saying, we need your help.
Real quick, I just wanted to point out that the state legislature's Joint Finance Committee holds budget input sessions all around the state of Wisconsin and did not have one in Milwaukee County. No surprise. We talk a lot about shared revenue, right? But Milwaukee County as the economic engine for the state of Wisconsin, I think it's time to start unsharing more of our revenue because Milwaukee County is subsidizing the rest of the state. We need to change that narrative and keep more of the revenue that we generate in Milwaukee County here at home.
Thank you.
My question is for Jim. You said you generate 40% of your own revenue every year. Do you get to keep that, or you have to go back on bended knee and ask for it back because it ends up in general revenue, and then you don't get it? You don't necessarily get it back.
Milwaukee County operates on a calendar fiscal year, and at the end, and New Year's Eve every year, we start over. So it is a balancing act of trying to generate as much revenue as we can during the busy season, the summer, and into this time of year, and then making sure that we can spend it and invest it. And usually it comes in the form of where are our major maintenance needs? What are those repairs to what's broken throughout the park system that at any given point we have a list of about $2 to $5 million worth of repairs that are needed. So we try to, it's not the right time of year to do construction work in the fourth quarter of the year, but we try to fund as much of that as we can because as you indicated, you're right, all of the funding at Milwaukee County gets mixed, and if you use it, you lose it. If you don't use it, you lose it.
Yeah. So it ends up, your profit ends up in general, or your funds that you generate ends up in general revenue, and then you have to beg for it back.
Every year we establish a new budget, and it begins in 2 weeks. October is budget season that determines what next year's budget looks like. It's usually based on the current year's budget as your starting point, but we start over every single year with a new budget.
Okay.
Well, please join me. Our time is up, but I know this could keep going, so keep the conversation going for sure. I'd like to ask you to join me in thanking our panelists for their time.